She used to walk through the hospital halls with quick, confident steps. The sound of her shoes tapping against the polished floor was something the nurses recognized even before they saw her. She was young, focused, and already known for her steady hands. Patients felt safe when she stood beside their beds. Other doctors often asked for her opinion during difficult cases. She did not speak loudly, but when she spoke, people listened. Becoming a surgeon had not been easy for her. She came from a simple background. No one in her family had worked in medicine before. She studied late into the night, while others slept. She missed weddings, birthdays, and holidays. While her friends were building social lives, she was building skill and discipline. She believed that saving even one life made every sacrifice worth it. In the operating room, she was calm. Even during emergencies, when alarms rang and voices rose, her hands never shook. She had a quiet strength. She did not panic. She did not blame others. She focused only on the patient in front of her. Senior doctors noticed her dedication. Some even said she would become one of the best trauma surgeons in the city. She did not let praise change her. She simply worked harder. Then one evening, after a long shift, everything changed. It was raining heavily that night. The sky was dark, and the roads were slippery. She was exhausted but satisfied. She had just completed a difficult surgery that had lasted many hours. Before leaving, she checked on her patient one last time. The monitors were stable. The family was hopeful. She smiled softly and said she would see them in the morning. She never made it home that night. On her way back, another vehicle lost control on the wet road. It happened in seconds. There was a loud crash. Metal twisted. Glass shattered. The world spun and then went silent. When she opened her eyes again, bright lights blinded her. She could not move. She could hear voices around her, but they sounded far away. She tried to speak, but her mouth felt dry. Pain shot through her body like fire. She understood where she was. The hospital. But this time, she was not wearing a white coat. She was lying on a stretcher. Days passed in a blur of surgery, medication, and restless sleep. She drifted in and out of consciousness. When she was finally fully awake, she saw familiar faces around her bed. Doctors she had worked with stood quietly. Some tried to smile. Some avoided eye contact. She knew something was wrong. One of the senior surgeons gently explained her injuries. Her spine had been severely damaged. They had done everything they could. Multiple operations. Long hours. Careful work. But the damage was permanent. She would never walk again. The words fell heavier than any pain she had ever experienced. Never walk again. At first, she did not cry. She simply stared at the ceiling. Her mind refused to accept it. She had spent her life helping others recover. She had believed medicine could fix almost anything. Now she was the patient, and there was no surgery that could restore what she had lost. The weeks that followed were the hardest of her life. Rehabilitation was slow and exhausting. She had to relearn simple things. How to sit upright without falling, how to transfer from bed to a wheelchair, how to move without feeling trapped. The wheelchair became part of her life before she was ready to accept it. Visitors came often in the beginning. Flowers filled her room. Cards covered the table beside her bed. Many people told her she was strong. They told her she would overcome this. They told her she was an inspiration. But when the lights were off and the room was quiet, she felt something else. Fear. She wondered if her career was over. She wondered if she would ever step into an operating room again. Surgery required long hours on her feet. It required movement, balance, endurance. Who would trust a surgeon in a wheelchair? After months of therapy, she made a decision that surprised many people. She wanted to go back to work. Some colleagues supported her immediately. They said her mind was still sharp. Her hands were still skilled. But others were unsure. They worried about hospital policies. They worried about patient confidence. They worried about what people would say. The hospital administration arranged a meeting. They spoke kindly but carefully. They suggested she consider teaching medical students instead of operating. They told her it would be less physically demanding. They said it might be a smoother transition. She listened quietly. Then she said something simple. I didn't become a surgeon to sit away from the table. Her voice did not shake. After more discussions, she was allowed to return, but with conditions. She would start slowly. She would assist before leading surgeries. They would evaluate performance. The first day she returned, the hospital felt different. The same walls, the same smell of disinfectant, the same busy corridors. But the way people looked at her had changed. Some smiled warmly. Some looked uncomfortable. A few stared too long at the wheelchair before quickly looking away. She rolled herself toward the operating room, her heart beating faster than it ever had during surgery. Inside, everything felt both familiar and strange. The operating table seemed higher than she remembered. The lights seemed brighter. She positioned her wheelchair carefully and locked in place. Her hands rested on the surgical tools. For a moment, doubt tried to enter her mind. Then the patient was brought in, and everything else disappeared. When the procedure began, her focus returned like it always had. Her movements were precise. Her instructions were clear. The team followed her lead without hesitation. Hours passed. When the surgery ended successfully, there was a quiet sense of relief in the room. She had done it. But outside the operating room, not everyone was celebrating. Whispers began to spread in corners and behind closed doors. Some questioned whether it was safe long-term. Some said patients might lose confidence if they saw her condition. A few were less kind. One afternoon, as she waited near the nurse's station, she overheard two voices speaking in low tones. They did not realize she was close enough to hear. "That's her," one of them said softly. "The crippled surgeon?" A short silence followed, then a quiet laugh. The words hit her harder than the accident ever had. Crippled surgeon. She felt heat rise in her face. For a moment, she could not move. It was not just an insult. It was a label, a way of reducing her entire life, her skill, her sacrifice, into one cruel phrase. She rolled away before they noticed her. That night, she sat alone in her apartment. The wheelchair stood still in the middle of the room. Rain tapped gently against a window, almost like it had the night of the accident. She replayed the words again and again in her mind. Crippled surgeon. Part of her wanted to quit, to avoid the stares, to escape the whispers, to choose the easier path everyone had suggested. But another part of her remembered the faces of patients she had saved, the families who had thanked her with tears in their eyes. The reason she chose this life in the first place. She did not become a surgeon because it was easy. She became a surgeon because it mattered. The next morning, she returned to the hospital. The whispers did not stop immediately. The looks did not disappear overnight, but she stopped listening to them. Instead, she listened to heartbeats through her stethoscope. She listened to the rhythm of machines in the operating room. She listened to her own steady breathing before each procedure. Every successful surgery became her answer. Every healed patient became her response. The nickname still floated through the hallways, but no longer controlled her steps, whether she walked or rolled. She understood something important during those early days back at work. Strength is not about standing. It is about refusing to fall in spirit. And even though the hospital corridors felt colder than before, she moved through them with the same quiet determination she always had. She had lost the ability to walk, but she had not lost who she was. And deep inside, without telling anyone, she made a promise to herself. One day, they would not remember her as the crippled surgeon. They would remember her as the surgeon who never gave up. And this time, she would prove it not just with words, but with every life she saved. Months passed since she returned to the hospital. Every day was a test of patience, endurance, and willpower. The wheelchair had become an extension of her body, but it was not easy. Every movement required planning. Every step, or rather roll, demanded effort. She often spent hours just adjusting her position to reach surgical tools. Simple things, which once were automatic, now required thought and focus. But she never complained. Complaining, she believed, would not change anything. Only action could. Her first few surgeries back were nerve-wracking. She would feel her heart beat faster than ever before, even more so than during medical school finals. Yet, as soon as the first incision was made, the fear vanished. Her hands remembered what her mind did not need to guide. She felt a familiar rhythm, The pulse of life, the flow of blood, the rise and fall of machines. Patience became her world again, and for those moments, nothing else mattered. Outside the operating room, challenges were constant. Hospital corridors were crowded. Elevators were slow, and sometimes staff would block her path without meaning to. She noticed how people instinctively whisper when she passed, and she learned to roll past without reacting. The whispers called her many names, but she decided she would define herself, not let others do it. She would let her work speak louder than words. Some days were harder than others. A young nurse would stare, unsure whether to offer help. A patient's family would hesitate when they saw her in the wheelchair, doubt flashing in their eyes. She reminded herself that fear and doubt were natural responses. Her responsibility was not to convince everyone, only to do her best for those she could help. That thought carried her forward. She dedicated herself to learning new techniques that worked for her situation. She redesigned her approach to procedures that demanded standing for long hours. She practiced using tools differently, adjusted angles, and modified techniques so she could be just as effective, if not more so. Each improvement became a victory. Each successful surgery became proof that her spirit was stronger than her body. Her colleagues noticed. Some were skeptical at first, watching quietly from a distance. Then, slowly, respect began to grow. They saw the same precision, the same calm decision-making, the same dedication they had admired before. Some started seeking her advice again, realizing that her abilities had not diminished. Others, still cautious, could not deny the evidence in front of them. But not everyone was easy to win over. Some whispered behind doors. Some doubted her every choice. The nickname crippled surgeon still floated to the hospital like a shadow. She heard it sometimes, faint but cutting. Each time, she paused and remembered why she was here. Not for praise, not for approval, but for the patients who could not wait for perfection, for the lives that depended on her hands and her judgment. Outside the hospital, she trained herself relentlessly. Physical therapy was not enough. She started strength exercises for her upper body, core, and hands. Hours were spent pushing herself beyond fatigue. She learned how to transfer quickly, how to stabilize her body during long operations, and how to manage pain without distraction. Each day, her endurance grew and her confidence returned. Her determination began to inspire others. Younger doctors and medical students started noticing her perseverance. They saw that setbacks did not define ability. They saw that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. She became an unspoken mentor, showing through example rather than instruction. Her story spread quietly, not through announcements, but through the impression she left on those who watched her. Despite the progress, every day brought new challenges. A surgery could go longer than expected, her body would ache, and the wheelchair sometimes felt limiting. She had to plan every move, anticipate every need, and remain calm even when mistakes seemed imminent. But she grew used to the rhythm of her life now. Pain was part of her routine, doubt a passing shadow, and effort the constant companion she had chosen. There were moments of quiet reflection. Sometimes, after a long day, she would sit alone in the break room, sipping coffee, and think about the life she had before the accident. She remembered running through hospital halls, speaking to patients without hesitation, and walking into operating rooms without pause. Nostalgia struck, but it did not weaken her resolve. Instead, it reminded her why she could not give up. She had too much to do, too many lives to touch, too many skills yet to perfect. She also began to notice subtle changes in the hospital culture. Colleagues who once avoided difficult cases now sought her guidance. Administrators who hesitated to approve her surgeries began trusting her decisions. Even the patients, initially uncertain, started expressing confidence in her care. It was not an overnight change, but a gradual recognition that ability is not determined by mobility alone. Her reputation was slowly transforming, not because of force or confrontation, but through consistent excellence. At night, when she left the hospital, she would sometimes pause to look at the building. The place that had once felt suffocating now felt like a stage for her resilience. Each door she passed, each floor she navigated, was a small victory over the fear and doubt that once surrounded her. She began to feel the power of her own determination, not just to survive, but to thrive in a space that had doubted her. She learned patience, not only with her body, but with people. Not everyone would understand immediately. Not everyone would believe in her. Some needed time to see, others to experience. She had time. Her work was her proof. Each life she saved, each surgical decision she made, became a quiet answer to the whispers and doubts. Her life had changed forever, yet she refused to let the change define her limits. She pushed boundaries, innovated techniques, and developed a rhythm that suited her unique situation. Her experience was no longer a weakness. It became a source of insight. She could empathize with patients and colleagues in ways she never could before. She understood fragility, resilience, and the silent strength required to keep going when others would stop. Her journey was not just about regaining her career. It was about redefining what success and strength meant. She proved that physical limitations could not define mental courage, and that true skill transcended the body. With each passing day, she became more than a surgeon. She became a symbol of determination, a quiet example of human endurance and focus. And though the nickname lingered in corners and hushed conversations, it no longer held power over her. She had discovered a deeper truth. That ability is not measured by physical mobility, but by the unwavering will to keep moving forward, no matter the obstacles. Every operation she led, every patient she saved, was a reminder that she was more than a label. She was a force of skill, courage, and relentless dedication. Months after regaining her place in the hospital, she faced a new kind of challenge, one that was not about skill, but about urgency. It was late at night when the emergency call came. A military officer had been badly injured in an accident. His condition was critical, and he was being airlifted to her hospital. The team of doctors available was limited, and the case was extremely complicated. Every second mattered, and hesitation could cost a life. She volunteered immediately, though some nurses and colleagues gave her cautious glances. They knew her abilities, but the thought of such a complex trauma surgery performed by someone in a wheelchair made some uneasy. She ignored the stares, the doubts, and the whispers that had followed her for months. In that moment, the patient's life was all that mattered. As the operating room was prepared, she noticed small changes she had implemented since her return. Tools adjusted for her reach, equipment arranged to accommodate her wheelchair. It was all part of her adaptation, but it reminded her how far she had come. The environment that once felt limiting was now manageable because she had learned to work with her body rather than against it. When the patient arrived, she quickly assessed the situation. There were multiple internal injuries, severe bleeding, and broken bones. The room was tense, and the team looked to her for guidance. She gave clear, concise instructions. Her voice, calm and steady, immediately took command of the situation. She focused entirely on the patient, ignoring the physical strain and her own exhaustion. The surgery was long and grueling. Hours passed as she navigated the complex procedure with precision. Her wheelchair was firmly positioned, her arms and shoulders working tirelessly to perform tasks that would have been routine before the accident. She adjusted constantly, sometimes leaning slightly, sometimes shifting a tool into a better position. Each movement was deliberate, each decision calculated. There was no room for error. Outside the operating room, a small group waited anxiously. They were members of an elite SEAL team. Their comrades' life depended on this surgery. They had seen many injuries before, but this one was critical. They could only hope that the doctors inside were up to the challenge. The fact that one of them was in a wheelchair had not escaped their attention. Yet, they remained silent, waiting, unsure what to expect. Inside, she ignored everything but the patient. Blood loss was significant. One moment required urgent suturing, the next, careful manipulation of fragile organs. The team followed her lead, responding quickly to every command. She maintained focus, feeling the rhythm of the room, the pulse of the patient, the whir of the monitors, the steady hands of her colleagues. Despite the physical limitations she faced, she had become the center of control, and the room flowed under her guidance. As the surgery continued, fatigue tried to creep in. Her arms ached, her back was sore, and yet she pushed forward. She reminded herself of the countless hours she had spent training after the accident, of the strength she had built. Every ounce of effort she exerted now was a testament to the work she had put into returning to this very moment. She could not afford to falter. Hours passed, yet she remained calm. Her voice never wavered. Her hands never shook. Even when complications arose, she found solutions quickly. A difficult incision, a sudden drop in blood pressure, an unexpected injury to an internal organ. She addressed each problem with the same meticulous care that had always defined her work. Her wheelchair was no obstacle. It was her station, her position from which she controlled the outcome. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the critical stages were completed. The patient's bleeding was controlled, vital signs began to stabilize, and the life that had hung in the balance was now secure. The team, exhausted but relieved, looked to her for confirmation. She nodded quietly, signaling that the surgery had been a success. The tension in the room lifted, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of work well done. Outside, the SEAL team's presence was palpable. They had been waiting for news, pacing the corridor, watching the clock. When they finally heard that their comrade was out of immediate danger, a wave of relief passed through them, but their attention quickly turned to her. She emerged from the operating room, still focused, still in command. Their eyes met hers, and for the first time, the whispers of doubt vanished from their minds. They saw skill, determination, and courage. In the quiet moments that followed, one of the team members stepped forward. Without a word, he raised his hand in a formal salute. It was a gesture of respect, of acknowledgement for the life she had saved. One by one, the rest of the team followed, forming a line of disciplined admiration. The hallway that had once been filled with whispers and doubt was now filled with silent reverence. She felt something she had not experienced in months. Validation that went beyond words, beyond recognition. It was respect earned through action. Her eyes met theirs, and she understood the weight of the moment. This was not about her wheelchair, not about the accident that had changed her life. It was about the skill, the calm under pressure, and the unwavering commitment that she had maintained despite every obstacle. The SEALs had seen her courage, her competence, and her ability to deliver when it mattered most. And in their salute, she recognized that her worth was measured not by limitation, but by performance and dedication. After the team departed, she took a moment to reflect. The journey had been long, the path filled with pain, doubt, and whispers. She had faced the darkest parts of fear and emerged not just intact, but stronger. Her work had saved a life, and in doing so, she had shattered the assumptions that had followed her since her accident. She returned to her routines with renewed purpose. Every surgery, every patient, every decision carried the weight of her experience and the quiet knowledge that she could face anything. The respect of those elite warriors was not a reward she had sought, but it became a symbol of her triumph over adversity. It reminded her that determination and skill could overcome the most challenging circumstances. The day had proven something fundamental. Her accident had not defined her. Her abilities, her courage, and her spirit were what truly mattered. And from that day forward, she carried a lesson with her. The true measure of a surgeon or any professional is not how others see you, but what you can accomplish when it matters most. Her story was changing, quietly but powerfully. She was no longer the crippled surgeon whispered about in corners. She was a surgeon who faced immense obstacles, who adapted, who persevered, and who had saved a life when it mattered most. That moment with the SEAL team marked a turning point, a quiet triumph that would guide her through every challenge yet to come. From then on, every call, every emergency, every critical patient became an opportunity to prove what she had always known, that her spirit, skill, and dedication could never be diminished by circumstance. The operating room was her world. Her hands were her instruments, and her determination was unshakable. And though challenges remained, she was ready for them all, knowing that her strength was now recognized not just by colleagues, but by those who understood the true weight of life and death. After the life-saving surgery with the SEAL team's comrade, she found herself facing an entirely new set of challenges. Word had begun to spread quietly through the city about what she had accomplished. Some stories exaggerated her struggle. Others focused on the life she had saved. Yet, the attention brought with it scrutiny. Hospital administrators started watching her more closely, observing her stamina during long shifts, measuring her ability to manage multiple emergencies and evaluating how patients responded to her care. Every day felt like a test she could not fail. Despite the added pressure, she continued her routine with unwavering focus. Each morning, she woke early, pushing herself through physical therapy exercises that went beyond what the doctors recommended. Her upper body strength had become her greatest asset, and she honed it relentlessly. She learned to maneuver her wheelchair efficiently, sometimes even faster than colleagues on foot. Every inch of independence she regained was a small victory, and she celebrated them quietly without fanfare. Her return to high-stakes surgeries became more frequent. Trauma cases, which often arrived unpredictably, were now her domain. She thrived under pressure. The operating room became her sanctuary, a place where the wheelchair did not define her. Only her actions did. Nurses and assistants who were once skeptical started anticipating her commands, understanding her rhythm and respecting her pace. Slowly, the whispers of doubt diminished as competence spoke louder than words. One evening, a young boy was rushed in after a severe car accident. His injuries were complicated: fractured bones, internal bleeding, and a precarious neurological condition. The hospital was understaffed, and panic rippled through the emergency team. She arrived just as the boy's condition began to deteriorate. Without hesitation, she took control, issuing rapid instructions while assessing the patient with her trained eyes. She moved her wheelchair into position, leaned forward, and worked methodically, each motion precise despite the strain. Hours passed, and the boy's life hung in the balance. Complications arose suddenly: unexpected bleeding, a collapsed lung, and a critical drop in blood pressure. The team faltered for a moment, but she remained composed. Calmly, she guided them step by step, delegating tasks and improvising where necessary. Her voice, firm but soothing, became the anchor for everyone in the room. Despite her fatigue, her focus never wavered, and eventually, the boy stabilized. The team exhaled collectively, knowing he had survived because of her guidance. It was during moments like these that she realized something crucial. Her value was not in the speed at which she moved, but in the clarity of her mind and the skill of her hands. She had adapted, developed techniques to compensate for her physical limitations, and learned to anticipate problems before they became crises. Her accident had forced her to think differently, plan differently, and act differently. And in many ways, she had become a better surgeon because of it. Outside of work, she began mentoring young medical professionals who struggled with self-doubt. They came to her with questions not just about surgical technique, but about resilience and perseverance. She shared her experiences candidly, explaining how fear, pain, and limitations could be overcome with discipline and focus. Students listened intently, inspired not only by her skill but by the calm confidence that came from surviving adversity and continuing to excel. She became a living lesson in courage and determination. Despite her growing reputation, challenges remained. Some families still hesitated when they saw her in the wheelchair. Some colleagues questioned whether she could endure prolonged surgeries or emergencies. Occasionally, hospital administrators suggested she limit her responsibilities. Each suggestion, though well-meaning, was a reminder that society often equated physical ability with competence. She faced these moments with patience and poise, demonstrating repeatedly that her value was measured in results, not appearances. The turning point came when the hospital received a call about a large-scale accident involving multiple casualties. She was among the first responders, navigating the chaos with her team. The emergency room was overwhelmed. Alarms blared, and every available hand was needed. She coordinated triage, delegated procedures, and performed critical surgeries without pause. Her wheelchair moved swiftly across the room, a symbol of both her adaptation and her unwavering determination. By the end of the night, lives had been saved, and the staff looked at her with a newfound respect that no words could convey. Even as recognition grew, she remained humble. She knew each life she saved was a team effort, and she acknowledged the contributions of her colleagues. Yet, internally, she felt a quiet satisfaction. Every operation, every successful recovery, was a confirmation that she had not only returned to her former skill, but had evolved into someone even more capable, someone who could face challenges that once would have seemed insurmountable. Months later, she was invited to speak at a medical conference about trauma surgery and resilience. As she shared her story, the room was silent, captivated not only by the technical knowledge she provided, but by the journey she had endured. The audience listened to her describe adapting techniques, pushing physical limits, and maintaining focus under pressure. Her wheelchair, present as a testament to her journey, was no longer a symbol of limitation, but a symbol of triumph. By the time she concluded her talk, applause filled the hall, not for sympathy, but for excellence and courage. Despite her growing acclaim, she continued to prioritize her patients over recognition. She returned to long shifts, complex surgeries, and emergency cases without hesitation. Her approach became methodical yet flexible, combining technical precision with empathy and insight. She had learned to anticipate not just medical complications, but human reactions. Fear, anxiety, doubt, and she addressed them as deftly as she did any physical injury. She understood that healing was as much about morale and confidence as it was about surgical skill. Her reputation began to attract attention beyond the hospital. Military organizations, aware of her work with the SEAL team, reached out for consultation. She was asked to train medics in field surgery, providing guidance on handling trauma in difficult conditions. For her, it was an extension of the same principle she had followed all along. Skill, preparation, and adaptability could overcome obstacles, whether in a hospital or on a battlefield. Her wheelchair did not hinder her influence. Her mind and hands amplified it. Through every challenge, she remained grounded. She knew setbacks could come, whether in recovery of a patient, a misstep during surgery, or logistical challenges. Yet, she had learned to face adversity with patience, clarity, and determination. The whispers of doubt that had once haunted her were now replaced by acknowledgement, respect, and admiration. And while she did not seek recognition, she had come to understand that her journey inspired not only her peers, but anyone who faced obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Her life had transformed completely from that rainy night, when everything changed. She had been labeled, underestimated, and doubted, but through relentless effort, adaptation, and courage, she had become a symbol of resilience. Every patient she saved, every trainee she guided, every operation she led was a reminder that true strength was measured not in the absence of difficulty, but in the courage to face it head-on and persevere. Her story was no longer about being the crippled surgeon. It was about being the surgeon who refused to be defined by circumstance, who overcame limitation, and whose impact reached far beyond the walls of the hospital. Years passed, and her reputation continued to grow, not because of sympathy, but because of results. She became known for her unwavering focus, her calm under pressure, and her ability to make impossible surgery succeed. People stopped referring to her as the crippled surgeon. Instead, colleagues, patients, and even strangers began to call her a symbol of courage, resilience, and skill. The wheelchair was no longer a limitation. It had become a tool that carried her through challenges she had once thought insurmountable. Her life outside the operating room transformed as well. She began giving talks at medical schools and conferences, sharing not only her technical knowledge, but also her story of perseverance. Young surgeons, nurses, and medical students listened to her words and watched her movements with awe. They saw someone who had faced the darkest moments of doubt and fear, and had not only survived, but thrived. She emphasized that medicine is as much about heart and determination as it is about skill. Her story inspired countless young professionals to push beyond their own limitations. The hospital she had returned to became her platform for innovation. She worked with designers to create tools and instruments better suited for surgeons with physical challenges, advocating for accessibility in operating rooms. Her ideas improved efficiency not only for herself, but for colleagues with any physical constraints. Her wheelchair had forced her to think differently, and those lessons benefited everyone. The innovation she introduced saved time, reduced errors, and gave the hospital a reputation for adapting modern medicine to real human needs. Her patients, too, felt the difference. Families often expressed gratitude not only for her surgical skill, but for the calm reassurance she provided. She had a way of making people feel safe, even when their lives hung in the balance. Her empathy, sharpened by the months she spent confined to her hospital bed after the accident, became one of her greatest assets. She understood fear and vulnerability firsthand, and she never allowed it to go unnoticed in others. Healing, she had realized, is never just physical. One day, she received a call from a military medical unit. They had heard of her work and requested her guidance for training medics who would face combat injuries in the field. She accepted without hesitation. Traveling to remote locations, she taught procedures under conditions that were unpredictable and intense, sometimes with minimal equipment. Her wheelchair traveled with her everywhere, a constant reminder that physical limits do not define capacity. Each medic she trained carried her lessons into life-saving work on the front lines, and each story they returned would reinforce her belief in the importance of resilience and adaptability. Through all of this, she never forgot the SEAL team who had saluted her years ago. Their gesture had been simple yet profound. It had reminded her that respect and acknowledgement are earned through action and dedication. She often reflected on that moment during difficult surgeries, drawing strength from a memory. It was a quiet, unspoken reminder that she had already overcome tremendous obstacles and that she could face whatever came next. Despite her accomplishments, she remained humble. Every life saved was a victory, but she knew that medicine is unpredictable and fragile. Mistakes could happen, complications could arise, and human error was always a possibility. She carried that awareness with her like a compass, guiding her focus and ensuring that her decisions were never made lightly. She never allowed pride to overshadow responsibility, and that balance became a hallmark of her career. Her story eventually reached broader audiences. Media outlets began to tell her tale, not sensationalizing her accident, but highlighting her skill, her courage, and her determination. Interviews focused on her innovations, her approach to trauma care, and her work training others. The public began to understand what she already knew. Her value was never in whether she could walk, but in what she could achieve. She became a symbol not only of medical excellence, but of the human spirit's ability to endure and excel despite adversity. One quiet afternoon, she wheeled herself into an operating room to assist on a complex procedure. A young surgical resident looked at her and hesitated. She smiled gently, offering reassurance, and guided them through the surgery. By the end, the resident was beaming, inspired not only by the successful operation, but by the strength and clarity of the surgeon leading them. This, she realized, was part of her legacy, passing on more than skills, passing on belief in oneself. Even when circumstances seemed impossible, her personal life, too, found balance. Friends and colleagues came to see her not as someone to pity, but as someone remarkable. Relationships were built on respect, honesty, and shared purpose. She had learned to rely on others without compromising her independence, creating bonds that were meaningful and genuine. She embraced life fully, refusing to let fear dictate choices, and in doing so, she inspired everyone around her to do the same. In the hospital corridors, whispers of doubt had long since vanished. The crippled surgeon was a memory, replaced by stories of life saved, challenges overcome, and lessons taught. Each day she rolled through those halls. She did so with quiet pride, knowing that she had transformed not only her own life, but the lives of countless others. The people who once doubted her now sought her guidance, and patients whose lives hung in the balance trusted her implicitly. The moment that had started it all, the accident, the wheelchair, the whispers, had become a turning point. Every step, every movement, every choice after that night had been about refusing to let circumstance define her. She had proven, not once but repeatedly, that determination, skill, and courage could overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Her story was no longer just her own. It belonged to every patient she healed, every student she trained, and every person who had ever faced a challenge and wondered if they could rise above it. And so, she continued. She saved lives, inspired others, innovated relentlessly, and proved every day that strength is measured not by the body, but by the spirit. The salute from that SEAL team had been a single moment of recognition, but the life she built afterward became a legacy. One by one, every life she touched, every student she guided, every patient she healed, confirmed the truth she had always known. She was not defined by limitation. She was defined by action. And in the end, she was remembered not as the crippled surgeon, but as the surgeon who never gave up, who never wavered, and who had changed the world simply by refusing to be defeated.